Lesson 9. Topics for discussion.
1. Use of free time. In periods of free time, one person will choose the TV set, another the piano, and another will head for the beach or the forest. These choices, which help to fulfill certain desires and needs which are not satisfied in our occupation and the other tasks of our daily lives, seem to be choices made at random. With the possibility in the future of even more free time than we now enjoy, we perhaps should be thinking of how to use the time more wisely. Some sociologists believe that boredom will become a problem if people have a great deal of unused time on their hands. This, they say, could be serious on a large scale, could even be a catastrophe for the human race if the problem is not solved, or an unequaled boon and blessing if it is. What would you predict about the effects of a great deal more free time on individuals and on society? If people had more free time, how should they use it?
Some questions to discuss. 1. Should we be using our free time differently than we are? Do we need to plan our free time activity in terms of what we expect from life?
2. What do you think the effects of a great increase in free time might be on society? Would people become bored, or would they use it to take on extra jobs and increase their wealth?
3. What do you think people would do if they only had to work 3 days a week? Would you use the non-work time for earning extra money, recreation, helping others, or what?
4. Would unlimited personal development really make people happy and really be good for society? Perhaps people would neglect other obligations in the pursuit of leisure values.
5. Will leisure activities be directed more and more by government or by economics? That is, will the things available to use be limited in any way by what commercial enterprises make available? Is this already the case in some areas?
The accompanying tape recording for this lesson contains a discussion of free time and touches on some of the questions above. Listen to the tape to get additional ideas that you can use in the discussion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Talk It Over, the radio panel discussion show. I'm your moderator and host, Ken Cunningham. Tonight we'll be discussing the coming world of leisure with our panelists, Professor Andrei Malinoff, a sociologist at the Institute for Leisure Research in London, Ontario, Mrs. Joyce Hazlitt, director of the Adult Education Program in Cleveland, Ohio, and Leo Emerson, who is editor of the magazine The Senior Citizen. Professor Malinoff, I wonder if you could start us off by giving us some idea of how much leisure we may expect in the future.
Certainly. It depends, of course, on how far into the future you want to look. Also, you have to consider what political and social systems will develop. And we need to try to predict something about people's willingness to work. You see, by letting machines do more and more of our work, man will have to work less and less himself. Without looking too far ahead, I can see a 30-hour work week, the worker putting in 3 10-hour days.
My goodness, that sounds good to me. And what effect will that have on our way of life?
Well, those 4 days of non-work are more than a person needs for rest and recuperation. And it is probably more time than he would want to spend on the kinds of hobbies and recreations that people now pursue.
That's an interesting point, because right now many of our senior citizens are having problems which result from having too much leisure. Some are not prepared for retirement and don't know what to do with the long hours.
I feel that we'll see a great increase in adult education. People will not only study for intellectual stimulation, but also to learn crafts and something about practical concerns, such as law, taxes, and similar things, so that they won't have to depend so much on specialists.
Now we come to a problem with our definition of leisure. If people study something in order to learn how to decrease their expenses, that's no longer a leisure activity, strictly speaking. There must be no utilitarian purpose present. The philosophers of the Western world felt that the appropriate activity of leisure was contemplation. This was meant to develop a man's nature to a level not possible when he lives solely under the limitations required by work. What I mean is that work is basically tiring and boring, and man naturally dislikes it and does not reach his fullest possible development when he's working.
And yet, isn't it true that many people simply waste their free time? They don't develop. They just don't do anything. Those people certainly do more when they work. I wouldn't say that sitting in front of the TV was going to develop anyone's personality, unless it was pretty low to begin with.
Probably not. But today we seem to have more and more people who believe that work is not man's highest goal. And yet occupation is the basis on which we have judged success and self-respect. In the United States, at least, the first question we ask about someone is, what is he? And we want to know by that what he does for a living.
But what we do for a living is one of the most important aspects of our lives. After all, no one's going to give us something for nothing, so if we don't make a living, the word leisure has no meaning.
Well, I guess a man's first need is to provide for his physical existence. But a man is thoroughly materialistic if he stops there.
However, one certainly wouldn't call a person materialistic because he works hard. In fact, it's what a person does in his leisure that tells where his values lie. And with an increased amount of leisure, we will really see what man is made of. Will he really develop into something else? Or will he just take it as more time in which to satisfy what we might call his animal appetites?
That's a frightening thought, isn't it?
But doesn't society need all kinds of people? We need the energetic as well as the contemplative.
I'd like to cut in here and ask Professor Molinoff one last question before our time is up. At the beginning of the discussion, you predicted a 3-day work week. Do you think this would have any effect on our whole attitude toward work? I mean, wouldn't every Monday be like coming back to work after vacation?
It might be like that at first, and it might be hard to settle down to work. But man is very adaptable, too. Research studies of the 4-day week show that people do work harder those 4 days than they formerly did during 5. And there are other ways to arrange work time, too. For example, some people might find it to their liking to work 6 days a week for 6 months, and then have half a year off. But if the work week gets down to less than half the free leisure time, there's the real possibility that our work will no longer be the main focus of our lives. We will be able to plan our life around our chosen leisure activities. For example, we could live at the beach or wherever we choose for 4 days a week, and then go to the city and live in a dormitory or a hotel for 3 nights while we're on the job.
That's certainly exciting to think about. I want to thank all of the panelists for taking part tonight, and to invite all of our listeners to tune in next week to this same station. Good evening, everyone.
New vocabulary in Topic 1. Text and tape. Repeat. Nouns.
Appetite. Blessing. Boon. Boredom. Catastrophe. Craft. Desire. Enterprise. Existence. Goal. Limitation. Philosopher. Self-respect. Sociologist. Value. Wealth. Willingness.
Verbs.
Decrease. Respect. Settle down.
Adverbs.
Basically. Solely. Thoroughly. Wisely.
Adjectives.
Adaptable. Contemplative. Energetic. Frightening. Intellectual. materialistic, unequaled, utilitarian,
Expressions.
at random, in terms of, senior citizen, strictly speaking,
Organizations.
adult education program, Institute for Leisure Research, Two, urbanization. In almost all countries of the world, there is a general trend toward urbanization. More and more of the world's population is becoming located in a relatively small number of large metropolitan centers. By the year 2000, it is estimated that 60% of the world population will be urban. To accommodate these people in urban housing by the turn of the century, the rate of construction must average about 40 times that of the past. As urban populations increase rapidly, populations of rural communities in these same countries are steadily declining. This imbalance between urban and rural populations and the consequent imbalance in economic well-being is causing a variety of problems in many places. Large urban centers are not without their difficulties. Complaints are heard from metropolitan areas around the world. Outcries about housing, transportation, inadequate water and sewage facilities, air and water pollution, overcrowding. And in some countries, improvements in transportation and technology have brought about what is called a megalopolis, a vast urban congregation of linked metropolitan areas. Where will it all end?
Some questions to discuss.
1. Why are people moving to the urban areas? What are the principal types of employment in rural and urban areas? What are some social or cultural advantages that the urbanite has over the rural dweller?
2. If so many people are moving to urban areas, how is enough food produced by the decreasing rural population to feed both themselves and the rest of the population?
3.
Discuss some of the problems brought about by urbanization. What is going to happen in the future if there is unlimited city growth? 4.
Are there any solutions to the problems caused by urbanization? What do you think can or should be done? What do some of the experts in the field say should be done? 5.
Is there much of a trend toward urbanization in your country? Do you feel this is causing problems? What is the government doing about the problems in your country?
The accompanying tape recording for this lesson contains a discussion about urbanization and problems caused by urbanization. Listen to the tape to get additional ideas that you can use in the discussion. Good evening. I'm Miles Long. Welcome to Timely Topics. Tonight's show is devoted to the topic of urbanization. We are pleased to have as our guests this evening Mr. Fred Finch of the Department of Housing and Urban Development and Mr. Lars Svensson of the Office of International Affairs, who has just completed a worldwide survey of urban planning developments. Mr. Finch, I know this is a very complicated subject. Can you give us a little background on some of the simpler aspects of the subject? When we say rural areas, are we talking about farm areas?
Not entirely. A rural area is characterized by open land with scattered farmhouses and small towns. The towns, in large part, serve as market and service centers. In the United States, for example, the farm population forms less than 1/5 of the total rural population.
I didn't know that. Now let me ask you, Mr. Finch, just why is urbanization taking place? Don't people like to farm anymore?
As I see it, there are two major factors in the rural to urban shift. The first is economic, and the other is social. Urban centers attract people from rural or depressed areas where jobs are in short supply. They come for economic reasons.
What are the principal economic differences between urban and rural communities?
A rural community, in most cases, is dependent upon agriculture and trading of supplies related to sustaining agricultural production. On the other hand, the urban centers have their economic base in manufacturing and industrial processes, and also in service industries, those which provide managerial or other services to their customers as opposed to products.
You mentioned a social factor in the rural to urban shift.
Yes, the social factor makes urban living very desirable to many people. They are in closer contact with more people, and thus have a chance to meet and make more friends with similar interests. Other advantages of urban life include a wider variety of places to dine and shop, and also more entertainment, such as movies, plays, museums and art galleries, and various recreational facilities, such as parks, tennis courts, and the like.
One more question, Mr. Finch. With all the people moving from rural to urban regions, how are the rural areas able to produce enough food to keep the entire population going?
In some countries, the answer has been better farm machinery, which has led to greater productivity. Incidentally, this use of machines is also true of other rural industries, fishing, forestry, mining.
But machinery has not been the answer in every country, has it?
No, it hasn't. Some countries are solving the problem through better agricultural techniques.
Yes, and as we saw in a previous program about the world food crisis, there are many countries which are having a great deal of difficulty. Let's turn now to some of the problems created by urbanization. Mr. Svensson, can you tell us in a few words what some of these problems are?
Yes. I would say there are two principal problems. The first is that in many, many countries, as a result of migration from rural to urban areas, the areas which the people have left have become depressed. That is, they are economically unable to sustain the residents and to contribute to the development of the nation. This unequal development has caused all kinds of economic, political, and social difficulties. This problem is the subject of debates in many of the countries I visited. In Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, Nigeria, Libya, India, Indonesia, Great Britain, France, to mention just some of them. The second problem is with the urban centers themselves and their almost uncontrolled growth patterns. Some of them have become so large that they have become inefficient and unable to provide at a reasonable cost the various services that people have come to expect. This is why we are hearing complaints about the lack of housing, the inability of public transportation to move people to their jobs, etc.
These seem like almost insurmountable problems. Is there anything being done? What are the major developments in this area, and what did you find out from your worldwide survey, Mr. Svensson?
The most important development of all is the fact that people are recognizing that national governments must become involved in the problem. The problems and costs are simply too big for small units of government to deal with.
That's very interesting, but what exactly is being done?
All kinds of things, but the important thing to realize is that each country's problem is unique, and in general is requiring a different type of solution. One type of development is taking place in several countries, however, and this is the new towns concept. New towns are also referred to in some countries as new communities or new cities, but the idea is the same.
I haven't heard anything about this development.
The idea is just now being tried in the U.S., but it has been under development and experimentation in a number of other countries for some time. It involves the planning and development of new cities or towns to help curb metropolitan growth in one area by providing new migration targets in other regions.
Has this been successful?
Yes, indeed. In Venezuela, for example, it proved enormously successful. It is also proving to be a useful device in Great Britain, Finland, Spain, and several other countries.
You mentioned that each country's problem is different. What else did you find out?
Well, in France, the solution has not been to create new cities, but to stimulate the increased growth of 8 existing regional centers to compete with Paris. And in Sweden, various types of incentives are being offered to take the pressure off Stockholm and to stimulate location of new industries in the north and west of the country.
As interesting and important as this subject is, I see our time is up. Thank you, Mr. Svensson and Mr. Finch, for being with us. This is Miles Long, wishing you a very pleasant evening.
These are most of the new words that are used in the discussion of Topic 2. Use an all-English dictionary in looking up the words you need to know. New vocabulary in Topic 2. Text and tape.
Nouns. Advantage. Aspect. Base.
Congregation.
Contact. device, forestry, megalopolis, overcrowding, productivity, resident, sewage, shift, survey, urbanization, well-being.
Verbs: average, decline, decrease, dine, involve.
Adjectives: characterized, depressed, inadequate, insurmountable, linked, managerial, metropolitan, unlimited, worldwide.
Adverbs: incidentally, relatively. Noun compounds: growth pattern, market center, service center.
Organizations: Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of International Affairs.
End of Lesson 9.